Namaste. Indians in America are now the third largest Asian community, so it's no surprise that more Americans are discovering the bold and intriguing flavors that Indian food has to offer. However, a lot of people are hesitant to make Indian food because of the long prep time, the long cooking time, or some of the weird ingredients that are in it. However, I would like to put your fears aside by revealing to you how to make a relatively simple Indian dish that's very popular, and that's Gulab Jamun. This dessert is similar to donuts in the fact that they are fried dough balls that are then they are soaked in a syrup with rose water and sugar. And gulab comes from the Parsi word for rose because of the rose water, and jamun refers to a type of tree in India with big dark seeds which kind of resemble the dough balls that are formed in this dessert recipe. But enough talk. Let's make Indian easy. I'm going to go put on some more comfortable clothes. As Miss Howard might say, sing the ABCs twice. And I'm going to be extra careful. Okay, let's get going. First we're going to start with a simple syrup, which is what the Gulab Jamun is going to go into when it's finished. So we're going to start with some water. I've already heated it a little bit. This is 1.5 cups of water. We want this to boil. And meanwhile, I will talk a little bit about the cardamom, because besides the water and the 1 1/3 cup sugar, which I'm going to put into it, I'm going to put in this cardamom. And I'm not going to put in very much because it's really strong. But if you want to know what cardamom is, maybe you don't know, it's a very strong spice. It's popular in Indian food. It comes in these little pods. When you cut them open, you have these little seeds. So I ground the cardamom, pod and all, into this powder. And because it's so strong, I'm only going to start with about 1/4 of a teaspoon. Just because you will taste it right away, especially because the dessert's soaking in it. So, I'm going to wait for that to boil. Once it does boil, I have this whisk. I'm going to stir in the sugar. I'm going to whisk it around a little. I'm going to add the 1/8 teaspoon of the cardamom and let it stir. I'm going to let it simmer for a while afterwards because letting it simmer will make it thicker and it'll be that syrup that we want it to be. So I have my pot here centered on the burner. It's on a good size burner so that I got the nice surface area that's all heated up and it'll heat up quicker. And at the end, I'm going to add this rose water because the rose water is a big part of this dish. The rose water goes in the syrup, but at the end so I don't destroy the flavor of the rose water, which is a pretty delicate flavor. So I'm going to add that at the end. So let's stir the sugar so that it dissolves into my syrup. And here's my ground cardamom. I actually have a 1/4 teaspoon measure. Be really light with how much I put in here just because it's so strong. Stir it for about a minute until it's dissolved and then just simmer it for a while on low heat so that it can get that thick syrupy consistency, and once it has gotten that consistency, you can set it aside because you won't need it again until the end of the recipe. And there's your syrup. I'm going to move on to the batter next. So, moving on to the batter we're going to start with our dry ingredients. We have 1 cup dry non-fat milk. You can get this anywhere at your local grocery store. You will find it. I got this from Albertsons. Some baking soda, actually just a pinch of baking soda, and 1/4 cup of all-purpose flour, which probably all of you have in your house. So I'm going to start by putting on those dry ingredients first. There's the flour, there's the dry milk, and a lot of Indian cooking doesn't use precise measurements, so a pinch could just be a pinch. I'm going to say about that much. So now I have all my dry ingredients in here. I'm going to use my spoon to stir it. While I stir my dry ingredients, I'm going to talk about the difference between ghee and butter. And no matter what you're using in this recipe, you want them to be unsalted or you're not going to have a very pleasant dessert. So, ghee is basically butter. We actually made this at home from regular butter. But the difference between ghee and butter is that when you cook ghee, pronounce the H very strongly, you cook your butter and it'll form this kind of foam at the top and it'll form this sediment at the bottom. And you take both of those out so you just have this kind of caramelized butter. So I'm going to take my room temperature butter here, or ghee, 3 tablespoons of it. And I'm gonna, so it'll nicely go into my dry ingredients here. Oh, this is 1/4 cup milk. If you use whole milk, it'll be a more rich dessert. I'm using skim milk, so it's really just a matter of preference. And right away, you'll see it get that doughy consistency. I'll be able to mix the ghee in a lot better, a lot more easily. And you'll just let that sit. You can let it sit for quite a long time. After about 20 minutes, it'll probably thicken up. So, I'm going to keep stirring this, and this is your batter. So, it's been a couple hours since I made the dough. It looks kind of like this. It's definitely thickened. I've actually started forming it into some balls here, and I'll show how to do that in a moment. I've also cooled the syrup. I strained the cardamom out of it. It looks pretty clear. And now I'm reheating it because I'm going to be putting the Gulab Jamun back into it. And it should be hot. So I take some of my dough. It's just about the right consistency. And take about this much. They don't need to be very big. They don't really expand, but you might not want them that big because then they'll take longer to cook and they may not cook quite right. So I'm just rolling it like this. You want it to be pretty smooth. Make sure you really, really wash your hands before this because you are, of course, handling dough with your hands. I know I washed my hands for a while. So it looks pretty smooth like this. I have my oil here in a skillet. I'm just using plain canola oil because it's not very strong. You won't taste the flavor of it so much. So it's at about 300 degrees. So very carefully I'm just going to drop it in there. And see, it's going to start bubbling. Soon enough it'll be golden brown. Depending on how big you make them, they'll probably be in there for about 5 to 7 minutes before you want to take them out. Add some more that I already have in here. So just about for this size, 5 minutes. So I have about probably 1 inch of oil in here. You probably want about 1 to 1.5 inches, depending on how big yours are. So now we wait for them to get golden and crispy. They're going to really kind of look like crispy donuts when you take them out. They're going to smell and taste like them too. Alright, so now that once they start floating, you have to make sure your oil is the right temperature so that they rise, but they don't rise too quickly or else it's too hot. You don't want them to sink to the bottom either because then it's too cold. So I have my little dough balls here, my little donuts. I'm putting the next part of the batch in. And then we're almost done. There's just one last step. I'm actually just kind of going to drop them in. It's faster. Since these are Gulab Jamun and Gulab does mean rose, we are going to add some rose water. And rose water, I'm using rose water, not rose syrup. The syrup already has sugar in it, but we already have sugar in our syrup. And it smells like a bouquet of roses. So, once again, this is an Indian dish where we don't precisely measure everything. And we don't want the rose to overpower the other flavors of the cardamom and what else is in the syrup. So I'm just going to use about a spoon's worth. And I'm putting it at the end because I didn't want the flavor to get ruined when the syrup was simmering for such a long time earlier. And if you don't have rose syrup at home, they still taste great. They just don't have the gulab part of the Gulab Jamun. They don't have the rose in them. So the rose will add a little bit more to the flavor. It'll be a little bit more authentic. So these are looking perfect. And you can kind of smell the rose from the rose water. Hopefully if you've learned anything, you've learned that cooking Indian food is easier than you may have thought earlier. And now we've made Indian easy. So besides ending up with a great dessert, now you have some skills for making food in the future, especially exotic food. To go back over the steps, they include making the syrup, making the dough, forming the dough into balls, frying the balls, and then putting them in the syrup. And now, you get to try them. So, making Indian easy. Thanks for watching.